The garage door had barely cleared my head when the screaming began. "That man is stealing my car. Call the police right now." Beverly Crestmore, our HOA president, charged across her perfectly manicured lawn with phone pressed to her ear, her shrill voice cutting through the suburban silence like a knife. "Pause this video and tell me, where are you watching from?" I like to see how far these HOA stories travel. I stood frozen in my own driveway, the keys to my father's 1967 Chevrolet Camaro SS still dangling from my fingers. The scent of fresh polish and gasoline still clung to my clothes from hours spent in the garage. Sirens already echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. In less than 3 minutes, I would be standing in handcuffs, accused of stealing my own car from my own property. But what Beverly didn't know was that my father had prepared for this moment 20 years ago, and the documents she waved in the air like a victory flag would become her undoing. Willow Creek Estates was the kind of neighborhood where silence had weight and conformity was currency. Every lawn precisely cut to exactly 2 3/4 inches. Every mailbox the same brushed nickel finish. Every house painted in variations of beige that whispered rather than spoke. The only sounds after 8 p.m. were the whisper of sprinklers and the occasional hum of a luxury sedan gliding down streets wide enough to accommodate 2 SUVs without their mirrors touching. I had moved here 6 months ago, seeking quiet after a decade of city living, bringing with me only my tools, my books, and the project that represented my last connection to my father. The Camaro had been his unfinished symphony, a 1967 SS that he'd been restoring when the cancer took him 3 years ago. As an aerospace engineer, I found solace in the precise mechanics of restoration, the alignment of tolerances, the satisfaction of something broken made whole again. My days settled into a rhythm of working from home as a consultant and spending evenings in the garage, the radio playing classic rock as I brought the Camaro back to life piece by piece. Beverly Crestmore introduced herself my second week in the neighborhood, arriving at my door with a welcome basket containing organic teas and a 3-inch binder labeled Willow Creek Estates HOA Regulations. At 47, she carried herself with the authority of someone who believed their opinion constituted law. Her blonde bob never moved in the wind, her pastel sweaters always looked freshly steamed, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. As HOA president and local real estate agent, she explained she was there to ensure property values remained protected. Her eyes had lingered on my open garage that day, taking in the Camaro on jack stands, the tools lining the walls, the slight oil stain on the concrete floor. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She mentioned something about residential zones and commercial activities, her voice sweet, but her words sharp. I dismissed it as neighborhood busybody behavior, the kind my father had always warned me about. He used to say that some people measure their worth by the control they exert over others. The first violation notice arrived 2 weeks later. Typed on heavy cream paper with the HOA letterhead, it cited Section 4.7b of the Covenants, prohibition of unsightly mechanical equipment in driveways. The notice included a grainy photograph of my floor jack sitting beside my car, taken from an angle that suggested someone had stood on my property to capture it. I moved the jack inside, paid the $50 fine, and thought nothing more of it. The second notice came regarding the audible nature of my work. Section 8.3a about excessive noise after 6 p.m. I'd been using an impact wrench to remove stubborn lug nuts at 6:15. After that, I became more careful, closing the garage door when working late, keeping my music low, wiping away any oil stains immediately. But Beverly's attention seemed to grow rather than diminish. I'd catch her watching from her front window as I unloaded car parts. She began taking evening walks that always seemed to pause near my driveway. Once, I found her examining my trash cans, apparently checking for improperly sorted recycling. My neighbor Marcus, a retired history teacher who lived 2 houses down, warned me over the fence one afternoon. He said Beverly had a particular interest in vintage cars. Her husband had been a collector before their divorce. Marcus mentioned she'd tried something similar with his vintage motorcycle collection until he threatened legal action. He advised me to document everything, his tone suggesting this was more than casual advice. The Camaro was nearing completion, its sleek lines restored, its 396 big block engine rebuilt to perfection. Every bolt turned, every wire connected felt like a conversation with my father, the completion of something he'd left unfinished. I could almost hear his laughter in the rumble of the engine, see his smile in the glint of the sunset orange paint. This car wasn't just metal and gasoline, it was memory, it was legacy, it was the last gift my father would ever give me. Which is why, when the garage door lifted that Tuesday evening to reveal Beverly Crestmore already dialing 911, I knew this was about more than HOA violations. This was about possession, and I was about to learn that in Willow Creek Estates, some people would do anything to take what they wanted. The official notice arrived on the first Thursday of the month, the thick ivory paper stock feeling more like a legal summons than an HOA communication. It had been slipped into my mailbox without an envelope, the red violation stamp bleeding through to the back like a wound. Section 12.4c, it read, Commercial Activity in Residential Zone. The fine was $500 with an additional $200 per day until compliance was achieved. Compliance meaning complete cessation of all automotive restoration activities. The notice cited multiple anonymous complaints about noise, fumes, and decreased property values. But it was the final paragraph that made my blood run cold. The document stated that continued violation could result in lien placement on my property and possible seizure of unpermitted business assets, including vehicles and equipment. The language felt deliberately vague yet threatening, as if written by someone who understood how to imply consequences without explicitly stating them. That evening, I found Beverly waiting by my driveway when I returned from the hardware store. She stood with her arms crossed, wearing the patient smile of someone who had already won. She mentioned she could help me avoid the fines if I'd be reasonable. Her solution was simple. I would sign over temporary title to the Camaro to settle the outstanding violations, after which I could continue my work as a non-commercial hobby. When I refused, her smile tightened, and she mentioned something about city zoning inspectors making unannounced visits. The next morning, a white van with municipal plates parked across the street for 3 hours, a man with a clipboard taking notes while watching my house. That weekend, the first offer appeared in my mailbox, a handwritten note offering $15,000 for the Camaro, signed by a company called Classic Investments, LLC. The amount was laughably low, about a tenth of the car's actual value. When I didn't respond, a second offer arrived 2 days later, this time for $20,000, with a note suggesting this was my final opportunity before legal action would make the car worthless to me. The pressure escalated in small, calculated ways. My garbage collection was missed twice, with the company claiming they'd received complaints about hazardous materials in my bins. A city water inspector arrived to check for alleged runoff into the storm drains. My internet service developed mysterious interruptions during business hours. Through it all, the Camaro sat in my garage, nearly complete, its presence seeming to draw Beverly's attention like a magnet. Then came the evening I found the garage door slightly ajar when I returned from grocery shopping. I always kept it locked, yet the bottom hung 6 inches up, just enough for someone to slide underneath. Nothing appeared missing but my tools had been rearranged, and the Camaro's driver door showed a fresh scratch near the handle. A faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, the same floral scent Beverly always wore. I installed security cameras that night, positioning one inside the garage and another covering the driveway. 3 days later, the footage captured Beverly attempting to peer through my garage window at 11:30 p.m., her face illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. She tested the side door handle before retreating back across the lawn. The systematic nature of the harassment suggested this wasn't her first attempt at acquiring something she wanted. I began researching Beverly Crestmore and found a pattern of similar behavior in her previous neighborhood. 3 separate lawsuits settled out of court regarding disputed property matters. Her real estate license had been suspended for 6 months following complaints about pressure tactics. Yet here she was, president of the HOA, wielding power like a weapon. The final warning came via certified mail, a formal notice of hearing before the HOA board to discuss revocation of my occupancy permit due to repeated covenant violations. The meeting was set for Friday at 7 p.m. Attached was a photocopy of a bill of sale showing Classic Investments LLC had purchased a 1967 Camaro SS from a dealer in Arizona, with the V number blurred out, but the description matching my car. The implication was clear. They were creating a paper trail to challenge my ownership. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of a car idling slowly past my house 3 separate times. Each pass slower than the last, the engine note unfamiliar, the timing too deliberate to be coincidence. The Camaro seemed to sense the coming confrontation, sitting silently in the darkness of the garage, its restored lines waiting for the morning when everything would change. And change it would, but not in the way Beverly Crestmore anticipated. The morning of the HOA hearing dawned with an unusual chill, fog clinging to the perfectly manicured lawns like ghostly fingers. I awoke to find an envelope slipped under, my front door containing photographs of the Camaro from inside my garage, close-ups of the engine bay, the interior, the VIN plate. Someone had been in my garage again, this time while I slept. The images were printed on plain paper, no note attached, but the message was clear. They had access whenever they wanted. At 10:17 a.m., a tow truck parked 3 houses down, the driver, making no attempt to hide his interest in my property. He sat for 45 minutes, occasionally speaking on his phone while staring at my driveway. When I stepped outside, he quickly drove away, but not before I captured his license plate with my camera. My friend Sarah, a paralegal, ran the plates and found the truck belonged to a repo company with multiple complaints about aggressive tactics. The pattern became clearer throughout the day. A city code enforcement officer arrived unannounced, claiming reports of illegal garage conversion. A health inspector followed, citing anonymous complaints about chemical storage. Each visit felt coordinated, designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Between visits, I worked on the Camaro, the mechanical tasks providing calm in the growing storm. That's when I found it. A small magnetic GPS tracker attached to the inside of the right rear wheel well. Professional grade, weatherproof, with a battery life of 6 months. It hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had placed it during the night, likely when they took the photographs. I left it in place, not wanting to reveal my discovery. The HOA hearing that evening took place in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting, and a long table where Beverly and 2 other board members sat like judges. The proceedings felt predetermined, with Beverly citing violation. After violation, producing photos and documents that painted me as a serial rule breaker. She presented the fabricated bill of sale from Classic Investments, claiming they had proof of ownership and were prepared to take legal action to repossess their property. When I showed my clear title and registration, Beverly smiled condescendingly and mentioned how easily documents could be forged. She produced a notarized affidavit from a man claiming to have witnessed me attempting to alter the VIN plate. The man wasn't present, and the signature was illegible. What struck me most was how the other board members deferred to Beverly, nodding along with her accusations without question. They had the glazed look of people who had been thoroughly manipulated or threatened. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to proceed with lien placement and asset seizure proceedings. As I left, Beverly stopped me in the parking lot. Her expression had shifted from professional sternness to something colder, more personal. She mentioned my father, how he'd always been difficult about his cars, How some people never learn to let go of things that weren't theirs. The comment felt oddly specific, loaded with history I didn't understand. That night, I dreamt of my father working on the Camaro, his hands covered in grease, a worried expression on his face. He kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone. I awoke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of a car door closing softly outside. Through my bedroom window, I saw a dark sedan parked down the street, its interior light briefly illuminating before going dark. Someone was watching. The next morning, I discovered fresh scratch marks around the garage door lock, evidence of another attempted entry. My security cameras had been mysteriously offline between 2 and 4 a.m., the system rebooted remotely. The message was clear: they weren't going to wait for the legal process. They were coming for the car. I moved the Camaro to the center of the garage, blocked it with other vehicles, and installed additional locks. But as I worked, I realized this wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about something deeper, something that connected Beverly to my father, to this specific car, to a history I had yet to uncover. And that unknown variable made everything more dangerous. And question for you. What would you do if this happened to you? Confront them publicly or quietly gather evidence and get help? Tell me in the comments. The break came from an unexpected source. Marcus, my retired teacher neighbor, appeared at my back door with a dusty cardboard box. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it on my kitchen table. Inside were newsletters from the Willow Creek Estates HOA from 15 years earlier, back when the development was new. He'd been saving them for reasons even he didn't fully understand until now. The newsletters told a story in fragments, updates about property values, welcome messages to new residents, announcements about community events. But buried in the mundane details were patterns I'd missed. Beverly Crestmore had been on the HOA board for 12 years, president for 8. In that time, 7 homeowners with classic or valuable vehicles had either moved unexpectedly or sold their cars under mysterious circumstances. Marcus pointed to a photo from a 2010 newsletter showing a beautiful 1965 Mustang convertible owned by a family named Peterson. The Petersons moved out 3 months later, citing job relocation. The Mustang appeared in the background of a reel, estate ad featuring Beverly's smiling face 6 weeks after that. Another story mentioned a dispute over a vintage motorcycle collection that resulted in the owner accepting a sudden cash offer after multiple HOA violations. The seller was Beverly's brother. The most revealing discovery was in the financial reports section. Over 8 years, the HOA had paid over $300,000 to a security company called Sentinel Protection Services for neighborhood patrols. Sentinel shared the same address as Classic Investments, LLC, the company trying to buy my Camaro. The pieces began forming a disturbing picture. That evening, I followed Beverly, something I never thought I'd do. She drove to an industrial park 20 minutes away, entering a warehouse unit marked only with a number. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw something that made my breath catch. The warehouse contained at least a dozen classic cars in various states of restoration, along with shelves of automotive parts and tools. A man I recognized from the HOA board was supervising 2 workers as they detailed a vintage Corvette. This wasn't just about my car. This was an operation. As I watched, Beverly approached a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, someone who carried himself with authority. He examined a clipboard while she spoke animatedly, pointing towards something covered by a tarp. When he pulled back the cover, I saw the distinct shape of a first-generation Camaro. My Camaro. Except that was impossible. My car was still in my garage. I took photos through the window, my hands shaking. The man turned slightly, and I recognized him from newspaper articles. William Crestmore, Beverly's ex-husband, a prominent real estate developer who had been investigated for fraudulent property schemes 5 years earlier. The cases were dropped due to lack of evidence. Now I understood. This was a family business. I returned home to find my garage undisturbed, the Camaro still safe. But the duplicate in the warehouse suggested they planned to swap the cars or use the duplicate to support their ownership claim. The sophistication of the operation explained the confidence. They had done this before. That night, I examined my father's old documents more carefully. In his workshop manual, I found a folded piece of paper tucked behind a schematic, a handwritten note in my father's distinctive script. It mentioned a William Crestmore trying to buy the Camaro years earlier, making threats when refused. My father had written down a license plate number and the words, "Insurance Fraud Investigation," with a question mark. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it took on new significance. The GPS tracker I'd found on my car was still transmitting. Using a signal tracker, I discovered it was sending two signals, one to a local receiver and another to a number registered to Sentinel Protection Services. They weren't just tracking my car, they were monitoring my movements. The realization changed everything. This wasn't a simple dispute over HOA rules. This was organized crime disguised as neighborhood governance, and I was standing right in the middle of their next acquisition. The question was no longer how to protect my car, but how to expose an operation that had clearly been successful for years, and whether I could do it before they decided I was more trouble than I was worth. The discovery in my father's safety deposit box changed everything. I'd almost forgotten about the small brass key tucked in his old wallet, but something about William Crestmore's name triggered the memory. The box contained no cash or jewelry, only documents, insurance papers, restoration receipts, and a sealed envelope marked "For my son" in my father's handwriting. The letter inside was dated 2 months before his death. He wrote about the Camaro, how it represented more than just a car to him. During his time as an insurance investigator, he'd uncovered a fraud ring involving classic cars, stolen vehicles being cloned with fake VINs and documentation, then sold overseas. The operation was run by a group that included William Crestmore. My father had been gathering evidence when he was diagnosed. He believed his illness might not be coincidental, mentioning strange symptoms that began after he refused a bribe to drop the investigation. The most shocking revelation was about the Camaro itself. It wasn't just any restoration project. It contained hidden compartments with microfilm evidence of the fraud operation, including names, dates, and financial transactions. My father had chosen this specific car because its extensive restoration allowed him to hide the evidence in plain sight. He'd been waiting for the right time to come forward when his health declined too rapidly. The letter ended with a warning. If anything happened to him, I should trust no one and contact a specific investigator at the State Insurance Commission. I sat there in the bank's private room, the documents spread before me, understanding dawning with cold clarity. Beverly and William weren't just trying to steal a valuable car, they were trying to recover evidence that could destroy them. The HOA harassment, the fake documents, the surveillance. It was all about covering up much larger crimes. That evening, I examined the Camaro with new purpose. Following my father's instructions, I found the hidden compartment behind the glove box, then another under the driver's seat. The microfilm canisters were still there, along with a handwritten list of VIN numbers and shipping manifests. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of stolen cars, millions of dollars, connections to overseas buyers. As I was photographing the documents, my phone buzzed, an alert from my security system. Motion detected at the perimeter. On the camera feed, I saw two figures approaching my garage from the backyard. Not Beverly this time. Professional-looking men wearing dark clothing and carrying tools. They bypassed the alarm system with disturbing efficiency, heading straight for the Camaro. I grabbed the evidence and slipped out the back door just as the garage lights came on. From the shadows of my neighbor's yard, I watched them work. They didn't try to hotwire the car. Instead, they began methodically searching it. Exactly where? The compartments were hidden. They knew what they were looking for. When they found the empty compartments, their body language changed from professional to agitated. One spoke into a radio, and I heard a familiar voice respond. Beverly's, sharp with anger. "They're not here. He must have moved them. Search the house." I retreated further into the darkness, my heart pounding. This had escalated from property dispute to something far more dangerous. These weren't HOA busybodies, they were professionals. I needed help. Remembering my father's instruction, I contacted the investigator he'd named, Daniel Reeves at the State Insurance Commission. When I reached him, his reaction surprised me. He knew my father well, had been working with him before he got sick. He said they'd suspected the operation was still active but could never prove it. The microfilm evidence was the missing piece they needed. He warned me to stay away from my house. Beverly and William had connections in local law enforcement and would likely have my home watched. He arranged to meet me 2 hours later at a secure location. Those 2 hours changed everything. I returned briefly to grab essentials, approaching my house through backyards and alleyways. From a distance, I saw an unmarked car parked down the street. 2 men inside watching my house. Beverly's BMW was parked in her driveway, lights on inside. As I watched, William Crestmore's Mercedes pulled up, and he hurried inside, his body language tense. I used my phone to scan for wireless signals and found 3 new devices near my property, all transmitting. They had turned my home into a trap. At the meeting with Investigator Reeves, we examined the evidence together. His expression grew increasingly serious as he reviewed the microfilm. This was bigger than either of us realized. The operation involved not just car theft but money laundering, insurance fraud, and connections to organized crime groups overseas. The HOA had been their perfect cover, giving them access to properties, information about valuable assets, and a veneer of legitimacy. Reeves explained they'd been investigating William for years, but could never make anything stick. He had politicians and police in his pocket, enough to squash investigations. This evidence changed everything. It provided probable cause for federal involvement. But we had to move carefully. If they suspected we had the evidence, they would disappear or destroy everything. We developed a plan. I would act normal, pretend nothing had happened, while Reeves coordinated with federal authorities. They would monitor the warehouse and track the players until they had enough for simultaneous arrests. I returned home. As dawn broke, pretending to have been out early. The watchers were still there, more obvious now in the morning light. Beverly emerged from her house as I unlocked my front door, her expression a mixture of anger and triumph. She mentioned the hearing had been postponed due to new evidence coming to light. Her smile said she believed she had won. Little did she know, the game had changed completely. The evidence was no longer hidden in a car. It was in the hands of people who could use it. And for the first time, I held the advantage. But as I entered my house, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single rose on my kitchen table, the same type my father always kept on his workbench. Attached was a note. Like father, like son, don't make his mistake. They knew I had the evidence, and they weren't going to wait for the legal process to play out. And question for you. Do you think I did the right thing by keeping the evidence hidden in the car instead of going straight to authorities? Comment your thoughts below. The rows on my table changed everything. They weren't just watching. They were inside my home, leaving messages like calling cards. I immediately checked the Camaro, but it remained untouched, still blocked in by my other vehicles. The rows suggested intimidation rather than immediate action, a psychological game designed to unnerve me. That afternoon, Investigator Reeves called with urgent news. Their surveillance had detected increased activity at the warehouse. 2 additional cars had arrived, including a vehicle registered to a known associate of organized crime. They were preparing to move everything, likely within 48 hours. The federal team needed more time to coordinate the multi-jurisdictional operation, but the timeline had accelerated. Reeves advised me to stay elsewhere until the operation, but I refused. Leaving would make them suspicious, and I needed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Instead, I implemented my own security measures. Using my engineering background, I rigged the garage with additional sensors and cameras, including one with a direct feed to Reeves's team. I also installed motion-activated lights around the property perimeter and set up a decoy, a fake security system box with blinking lights clearly visible from the street. The psychological warfare continued. That evening, my power flickered, twice before going out completely. Through my window, I saw Beverly standing on her porch, watching my dark house with satisfaction. The outage lasted exactly 47 minutes, long enough to make a point, but not long enough to justify calling emergency services. When the power returned, I found my internet router had been reset, and my security camera feeds were temporarily offline. They were testing my defenses, looking for weaknesses. The next morning brought a new tactic. A city inspector arrived with a warrant to check for alleged structural violations in my garage. He spent an hour taking measurements and photographs, paying particular attention to the Camaro. When I asked what prompted the inspection, he mentioned anonymous tips about unsafe modifications to the structure. As he left, I noticed him discreetly placing something under his clipboard, another tracking device, this time on the frame of my daily driver. I left it in place, not wanting to alert them. The pressure intensified throughout the day. 2 different real estate agents called offering cash offers for my house, both mentioning they represented clients who wanted a quick, discreet sale. My email filled with spam and phishing attempts, some sophisticated enough to mimic legitimate communications from my bank and credit card companies. They were trying to overwhelm me, to force a mistake. That evening, Marcus appeared at my door, looking worried. He'd noticed unusual activity in the neighborhood. Strange vehicles, men walking dogs they clearly didn't know how to handle, a landscaping truck that spent more time watching houses than maintaining yards. He'd started a neighborhood watch years ago and recognized surveillance when he saw it. We compared notes quietly in my kitchen, realizing the operation was much larger than we'd imagined. They had people watching every approach to the neighborhood, not just my house. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with an alert. The GPS tracker on my daily driver was active, showing my car was moving. Except my car was still in the driveway. They had cloned the signal, another intimidation tactic. The final warning came at 11:23 p.m. My security system registered movement at all perimeter sensors simultaneously, impossible unless multiple people were surrounding the property. Through the cameras, I saw dark figures moving through neighboring yards, converging on my house. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. I activated the silent alarm connected to Reeves's team, then prepared to defend my home. But just as suddenly, as they appeared, the figures melted back into the darkness. A single car started down the street, its driver pausing to toss something onto my lawn. When I retrieved it, I found a burned photograph of my father working on the Camaro. The date. On the newspaper beside him, circled in red. The message was clear. They knew everything about us, and they weren't afraid to use it. I spent the remaining hours of darkness watching the street, my father's letter in my hand. He'd written about standing up to bullies, about doing what was right even when it was hard. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't hide or wait for rescue. I would use the one advantage they didn't expect, the Camaro itself. And I would turn their obsession against them in ways they never saw coming. The morning of the planned federal operation dawned with electric tension in the air. I had barely slept, spending the night preparing for what was to come. At 6:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a coded message from Reeves. The operation was greenlit for 10 a.m. They had secured warrants for 14 locations, including the warehouse, Beverly's home, William's office, and the homes of 3 other HOA board members. The scale was staggering, over 60 federal agents coordinating across multiple jurisdictions. As I read the message, another alert chimed. My security system detected movement in the garage. The feed showed Beverly herself, accompanied by two men I didn't recognize, attempting to bypass my additional locks. They moved with urgency, suggesting they knew their time was limited. I watched silently as they finally gained entry, their flashlights cutting through the dim garage. What happened next confirmed my deepest suspicions. Instead of trying to hotwire or tow the Camaro, they began working with practiced efficiency to remove specific parts, the dashboard, the seats, the door panels. They weren't stealing the car. They were dismantling it piece by piece, searching for something. Beverly barked orders, her voice crisp on the audio feed. Check the frame rails, the quarter panels. He wouldn't have put them in obvious places. Her words confirmed everything. They knew about the evidence compartments, but didn't know exactly where they were hidden. I activated the remote start system I'd installed on the Camaro, a modification they wouldn't expect. The engine roared, to life unexpectedly, filling the garage with thunderous noise. The intruders froze, startled by the sudden eruption of sound. In that moment of confusion, I triggered the security protocol I'd designed. Heavy shutters descended over the garage doors and windows, plunging them into darkness except for the Camaro's headlights now automatically illuminating. They were trapped. Through the cameras, I watched them panic, pounding on the shutters, trying to call out, but the garage was now a Faraday cage, no signals in or out. I had built it months ago for electromagnetic compatibility testing of automotive electronics, never imagining it would become a trap for criminals. As I monitored the situation, my doorbell rang. William Crestmore stood on my porch, his expression calm but his eyes burning with intensity. He held up a legal document, claiming he had a court order to seize the Camaro pending resolution of ownership disputes. His timing wasn't coincidental. He was providing distraction while his people searched the garage. I played along, inviting him in, offering coffee as if this were a social visit. He declined, his eyes scanning my living room, looking for any sign of the evidence. He mentioned knowing my father, how they'd been friends once, how my father had misunderstood some business arrangements. His words were smooth, practiced, designed to elicit sympathy or doubt. But I'd read my father's letter, seen the evidence of what William had done. As we spoke, I received another alert. Federal agents were moving in early. Something had spooked them, and the operation was accelerating. Through my window, I saw unmarked vehicles taking position around the neighborhood. William noticed my distraction and followed my gaze. His composure cracked for just a second, revealing the predator beneath. He made a call on his phone, speaking a single code word before ending the call. Immediately, I heard shouting from my garage, then the sound of tools being used violently on the shutters. They were trying to break out. William stood, his friendly pretense gone. He told me I could still walk away from this, that some battles weren't worth fighting. He mentioned my father's illness, suggesting it could have been prevented if he'd been more cooperative. The threat was clear and personal. That's when the federal agents stormed my house. They entered through front and back simultaneously, weapons drawn but controlled. William was restrained quickly, his expensive suit looking suddenly ridiculous as he was pressed against my wall. Outside, I saw similar scenes playing out at Beverly's house and other locations around the neighborhood. The operation was happening everywhere at once. But the real revelation came when agents accessed my garage. Beverly and her team had managed to partially disassemble the Camaro, but in their haste, they'd revealed something even I hadn't known about. Behind the dashboard, welded to the firewall, was a stainless steel box containing not just microfilm, but digital storage devices, paper documents, and even a handwritten journal detailing 20 years of fraud, theft, and corruption. My father had been more thorough than anyone realized. As agents cataloged the evidence, Beverly was led out in handcuffs. She saw me standing there and her expression shifted from anger to something else, almost respect. "You're just like him," she said. "Stubborn to the end." Then she smiled, a cold, knowing smile. But he still lost, didn't he? Her words hung in the air as she was placed in a squad car, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that this wasn't over yet. That there were still secrets to uncover, and some of them might be about my own family. The federal operation unfolded with military precision, yet the aftermath felt strangely anticlimactic. William and Beverly were in custody, their warehouse secured, their operation dismantled. News vans crowded the street, neighbors gathered in shocked clusters, and federal agents moved methodically through multiple properties. I stood in my driveway, watching the spectacle, the Camaro now surrounded by evidence technicians documenting every scratch and fingerprint. Investigator Reeves approached, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The evidence was overwhelming, he said. We've identified at least 37 stolen vehicles in their warehouse, along with documentation linking them to thefts across 6 states. This will be the largest classic car fraud case in history. But his tone suggested, but, and it came quickly. William isn't talking, but Beverly is trying to cut a deal. She's claiming there are bigger players involved, people William reported to, and she's saying something about your father that doesn't add up. Before he could elaborate, my sister arrived, her face pale. She'd been going through our father's old files and found something troubling. Bank records showing large, unexplained deposits in the months before his diagnosis. The amounts totaled nearly $200,000 from accounts later, linked to William's businesses. The timeline coincided with when my father was supposedly investigating William. The implication hung in the air like poison. Had my father taken bribes before having a change of heart? Was the evidence in the Camaro actually protection against his former partners rather than noble whistleblowing? I refused to believe it, but the doubt had been planted. That evening, as federal agents prepared to tow the Camaro as evidence, I made a request to drive it one last time to the impound facility. Reeves agreed reluctantly, assigning 2 agents to follow me. As I settled into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of leather and gasoline brought back a flood of memories. My father teaching me to drive stick shift on back roads, the countless hours we'd spent working on the car together, his laughter when the engine first roared to life after rebuild. This car was our history, our connection, and now it might be evidence of something I didn't want to face. As I drove through the neighborhood, I noticed something odd. A black SUV that had been parked near my house was now following at a distance, not one of the federal vehicles. I adjusted my route slightly, and the SUV mirrored my turns. My heart rate increased. Were there still players free? Had William been telling the truth about bigger forces? I signaled to the agents following me, pointing out the SUV. They radioed for backup and attempted to intercept, but the SUV accelerated suddenly, cutting through side streets with practiced skill. That's when I realized they weren't following me. They were herding me toward the industrial park where the warehouse was located. I tried to turn around, but another vehicle blocked my path, forcing me toward the warehouse district. The federal agents were now dealing with a coordinated distraction, a fake accident that blocked their path. I was on my own. As I approached the warehouse, the gates swung open automatically. I had no choice but to drive inside, the doors closing behind me. The interior was different than before. Most of the cars were gone, but in the center stood William Crestmore, not in handcuffs, but wearing a different suit, surrounded by men I didn't recognize. "Federal agents?" I asked, my voice echoing in the vast space. William smiled. "Private security. The federal custody was arranged. It seems some people very high up don't appreciate their operations being disrupted." He approached the Camaro, running his hand over the fender almost lovingly. "Your father never understood. This was never about money. It was about preservation, saving these beautiful machines from people who don't appreciate them." He told me a different story then, about a network of collectors who employed him to acquire significant automobiles by any means necessary. The HOA operation was just one method, a way to identify and pressure owners into selling. My father had been part of it initially, William claimed, before getting cold feet and trying to expose them. The money my sister found was his payment for initial cooperation. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The evidence, the stories, the contradictions, it was all designed to confuse and manipulate. William's men began surrounding the Camaro, their intentions clear. They wanted the car, and they wanted me silenced. But I had one advantage they hadn't considered. My father hadn't just hidden evidence in this car, he'd built in contingencies, and I knew every one of them. As they moved closer, I engaged the security system my father had designed, a series of electromagnetic locks that sealed the doors and windows, a distress beacon that activated, and most importantly, a hidden camera that began live streaming everything to multiple secure servers. William's smile faded as he realized what was happening. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "The footage will never see the light of day." But he was wrong, because my father hadn't just been an insurance investigator. He'd been prepared for exactly this scenario, and so was I. The standoff in that warehouse would become the defining moment of my life, and the Camaro, my father's legacy, would either become my tomb or the instrument of justice he intended it to be. The warehouse felt like a cage, the air thick with the scent of oil and tension. William's men formed a tight circle around the Camaro, their expressions professional but their eyes revealing nervousness. They hadn't expected the car to become a fortress. William himself approached my window, tapping on the glass with a gold ring. "Come out, Alex. This doesn't have to end badly. We can still make a deal. Your father would have wanted that." His use of my name felt like a violation, a calculated intimacy designed to unsettle me. I remained silent, watching the live stream. Counter on the dashboard screen, already over 10,000 viewers and climbing. My father's contingency plan was working better than I could have hoped. The footage was being broadcast to multiple news outlets and social platforms simultaneously, bypassing any attempts to suppress it. William's phone rang, and his expression darkened as he listened. He ended the call and slammed his hand against the roof of the car. "You stupid boy! Do you have any idea what you've done?" His composure shattered completely, revealing the vicious man beneath the expensive suit. "Get him out of there now! Smash the windows!" His men moved forward with crowbars and hammers, but as they struck the windows, the laminated glass held, designed to withstand much greater impacts. The Camaro wasn't just a car, it was my father's masterpiece of protection. As they struggled to break in, I activated the next phase of my father's design. Hidden speakers around the car began playing back-recorded conversations, William discussing fraud schemes, Beverly threatening homeowners, detailed plans of their operation. The audio echoed through the warehouse, captured perfectly by the live stream microphones. William's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, but I knew he recognized his own voice. The recordings were from the digital storage devices, in the firewall compartment, set to activate automatically if the car was breached. Outside, I heard sirens approaching, different from before. These were state police sirens, lots of them. William heard them too and barked orders to his men. "Abort! Get everything and go!" But it was too late. The warehouse doors burst open, and this time it wasn't federal agents. It was state troopers, in tactical gear, accompanied by investigators from the Attorney General's office. William had overplayed his hand, assuming his federal connections would protect him. He hadn't counted on the state investigation that had been running parallel to the federal one. In the confusion, I saw my opportunity. I started the Camaro's engine, not the tame rumble from before, but the full-throated roar my father had tuned for racing. The electromagnetic locks disengaged, and I threw the car into gear. William shouted, pointing at me, "Stop him!" But his men were distracted by the arriving police. I accelerated toward the loading bay doors, which began to open automatically, another of my father's contingencies, triggered by a hidden switch. As I burst out into the sunlight, I saw the full scale of the response. Dozens of state police vehicles, news helicopters overhead, and even more federal agents now arriving as backup. The live stream had forced everyone's hand. I skidded to a stop behind police lines, emerging from the car with my hands up. Investigator Reeves was there, his expression a mixture of anger and admiration. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said as he quickly moved me to a secure vehicle. "The footage is everywhere. William's political connections are already resigning." This is bigger than we imagined. Back inside the warehouse, the arrest unfolded like a textbook operation. William, Beverly, and 17 others were taken into custody. The evidence seized would eventually lead to convictions across multiple states, dismantling a network that had operated for decades. But for me, the real climax came later, when a senior state investigator pulled me aside. "We found something you need to see," he said, leading me to an evidence table. There, among my father's documents, was a signed confession from William Crestmore, dated 3 years earlier, admitting to everything but claiming my father was the mastermind. The document was crude, obviously coerced, but it explained William's desperation to recover the evidence. My father hadn't taken bribes. He'd been set up, and the money deposits were part of that frame job. The investigator also showed me something else, a letter from my father to the state attorney general, mailed the week before his diagnosis. In it, he detailed William's operation and explained that if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be accidental. He'd anticipated everything, even his own illness. The Camaro hadn't just been his project, it had been his insurance policy. As I stood there watching the arrests continue, I realized my father had given me more than a car. He'd given me a purpose, a legacy, and the tools to protect it. And in that moment, as the sun set over the warehouse, I finally understood the man my father had been, not a victim, not a corrupt investigator, but a hero who had planned 20 years ahead to ensure justice would eventually be served. The roar of the Camaro's engine had been his voice, and today, it had spoken louder than ever. 1 year later, the Camaro sat in my garage again, its restoration finally complete. The sunset orange paint gleamed under the LED lights, every chrome piece polished to perfection. It had been returned to me after the trial, all evidence documented, its secrets now part of legal history. William Crestmore received a 25-year sentence in federal prison, his political connections unable to protect him once the live stream footage went viral. Beverly accepted a plea deal and testified against the broader network, receiving 7 years but likely serving less. 12 other conspirators faced similar fates, their Operation Che-D dismantled. The Willow Creek Estates HOA was completely reformed, with Marcus elected as the new president. We repealed 23 unnecessary regulations and established transparent governance. Property values actually increased once the truth emerged. People wanted to live in a neighborhood that had fought corruption and won. My father's name was cleared completely. The state posthumously awarded him a medal for civic courage, and the local newspaper ran a front-page story about his investigation. I finally understood the man he had been, flawed, determined, but ultimately righteous. The Camaro became something more than a car. It appeared in parades, at charity events, even at schools where I talked about perseverance and justice. My father's legacy lived on in ways he never could have imagined. I still sometimes see Beverly's house sitting empty, its perfect lawn, growing slightly uneven without her obsessive care. The for sale sign has been there for months. Nobody wants the house where the HOA president ran a criminal operation. But the neighborhood has healed. We have block parties now, real ones where people actually talk instead of judging each other's landscaping. The silence of conformity has been replaced by the comfortable sounds of community. As I close the garage door for the night, I catch my reflection in the Camaro's flawless paint. For a moment, I see my father standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his smile finally at peace. The car was never just metal and gasoline. It was a promise that truth eventually wins, that legacy matters, and that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the opposition seems. And that promise, like the Camaro itself, will endure long after the last echo of scandal has faded from Willow Creek Estates.